Title: Cultural Appropriation, Africa's Identity, Beyond Borders. What if I told you that by some estimates, as much as 90% of Africa's most prized cultural heritage isn't actually in Times Africa? It's sitting in museums in London, Paris, and New York. And what if I told you that while global industries generate billions from the vibrancy of African culture, from fashion to music, the continent itself is being drained of an African culture estimated $88.6 billion every single year, specifically through illicit financial flows? We see the celebration, but where's the compensation? We see the style, but where's the substance? This is the story of how the soul of a continent is being systematically stripped for profit. It's a story that reveals why the line between appreciating a culture and appropriating it isn't just some simple misunderstanding. It's a battleground for Africa's identity, its history, and its future. The visible celebration, the invisible heist, you've seen it everywhere. An Ankara-inspired print on a fast fashion runway, an Afrobeats rhythm sampled in a global pop hit, a high fashion collection casually labeled tribal, with designs that look suspiciously like a Maasai shuka or a Ndebele neck ring. On the surface, it looks like the world is finally embracing African creativity. But if you look just a little closer, that beautiful facade starts to crack. Too often, this explosion of African culture on the world stage operates like a mine. Cultural assets are extracted, polished, and sold off, while the communities at the source are left with next to nothing. When a Western designer takes kente cloth, a fabric woven with centuries of Ghanaian history, and rebrands it as an exotic print for a summer dress, they're doing more than just borrowing. They're erasing. They erase the artisans who've passed down the craft for generations. They erase the context, the fact that every pattern and color in kente tells a story, marks a sacred occasion, or signifies social status. And most critically, they divert the profit. The global market for African-inspired textiles is booming, yet the communities that originated these designs rarely see a dime. This isn't a celebration. It's commodification without credit. It's a highly visible trend masking an invisible heist. The colonial echo, how we got here. This isn't a new problem. It's a deeply rooted colonial echo. To understand why a brand feels entitled to profit from African culture today, you have to understand how Europe decided it was entitled to Africa itself. Colonialism was never just about land and resources. It was about seizing Time's everything. Time's art, spirituality, and identity. The most infamous example, the Benin Bronzes. In 1897, British troops attacked the Kingdom of Benin in modern-day Nigeria. They burned the city, exiled its king, and looted thousands of intricate bronze and ivory sculptures from the royal palace. These weren't just decorations. They were the kingdom's history books, a sacred archive of its lineage. And where are those artifacts today? They're prize exhibits in places like the British Museum. For over a century, the argument was that Western museums were better equipped to care for them. It's an argument that neatly frames theft as preservation. This single act of violent appropriation set a devastating precedent. That African culture wasn't a living heritage, but a collection of raw materials to be taken and displayed by others. What began with soldiers and ships continues today with corporations and catwalks. The method has changed, but the mindset hasn't. Appropriation versus appreciation. Drawing the line. Okay, so this is usually the point where someone asks, but isn't it just cultural appreciation? Can't we celebrate other cultures? It's a fair question, but it often misses the single most crucial element in this debate: power. The real difference between appreciation and appropriation isn't about your intent. It's about the impact, the context, and who benefits. Appreciation is a two-way street. It's about learning, listening, and making sure the source community is credited and, where it's due, compensated. It's buying a dashiki from a Nigerian designer, learning what it means, and wearing it with respect. Appropriation, on the other hand, is a one-way street. It's when a dominant culture takes from a marginalized one and uses it for profit or cool points, usually without understanding or permission. It just reinforces the old power imbalances. This gets even more complex within the African diaspora. For many Black Americans, whose ancestors were stolen from the continent, connecting with African heritage through fashion or spiritual practices is a powerful act of reclamation. It's an attempt to heal a deep historical wound. But even this can cause friction. From the perspective of some on the continent, these efforts can sometimes feel like they're flattening thousands of unique cultures into one African aesthetic. Beyoncé's 2020 visual album, Black is King, sparked this exact debate. While many praised it as a stunning celebration of African imagery, some African critics noted that it blended unrelated cultural symbols and didn't always include contemporary African artists in its creation. It highlighted a real tension: the diaspora's search for a lost home and the continent's desire to be seen in its full, modern, diverse complexity, not just as a symbolic backdrop. Look, there are no easy answers here, which just proves this conversation has to be rooted in nuance and ongoing dialogue. The new scramble for Africa. This theft of culture runs in lockstep with a much larger modern-day economic heist. The same power dynamics that let a designer get away with stealing a print also enable the systemic draining of the continent's wealth. According to a 2020 United Nations report, Africa loses an estimated $88.6 billion every year to illicit financial flows. That's money moved out of the continent illegally through things like tax evasion by multinational corporations and corrupt deals. This is wealth that should be building schools, hospitals, and roads. It's almost double what the continent receives in foreign aid. Think about what that means. Countries losing the most money this way spend, on average, 25% less on health and 58% less on education. So when a global corporation mines for minerals in the Congo but shifts its profits to a tax haven, it's using the same logic as the fashion brand mass-producing Adire patterns without paying the Yoruba artisans who created them. Cultural appropriation is the soft power arm of neocolonialism. It normalizes the idea that Africa's assets, cultural or material, are there for the taking, reclaiming the narrative. But this is not a story about victimhood. It's a story about fighting back. Across the continent and the diaspora, a powerful movement is rising to seize control of the narrative. The African Union has even officially designated 2025 as the year of justice for Africans and people of African descent through reparations, embedding this fight into the continent's official strategy. And on restitution, the tide is finally starting to turn. Countries like Germany, France, and the Netherlands have begun returning some of the Benin bronzes and other looted artifacts, acknowledging they belong home. It's slow, but it's a monumental shift. More importantly, African creators are done waiting for permission. They're building their own stages. Designers like South Africa's Thebe Magugu and Nigeria's Adebayo Okelawal are weaving their cultural histories into global fashion on their own terms. Artists and musicians are using digital platforms to bypass the old gatekeepers and tell their own stories in their own voices to a global audience. They aren't just selling products, they are exporting culture with its soul fully intact. So, where do you fit in? How do you go from being a passive consumer to an active ally? First, get curious. Before you buy that print or listen to that beat, ask the big questions. Where did this come from? Who made it? And who's profiting? A little research is the first step. Second, put your money where your mouth is. Follow, amplify. And if you can buy directly from African creators and entrepreneurs, put your attention and your cash in the hands of the people at the source. And finally, use your voice. Join the global call for the full return of stolen artifacts. Support organizations fighting for fair trade and economic justice. Demand that the corporations and museums that profit from this culture give credit and compensation where it is long overdue. If this conversation meant something to you, share it so more people can understand what's at stake. The spread of African culture around the world should be a celebration, but a real celebration isn't one-sided. It requires respect, recognition, and reciprocity. For too long, the world has loved the rhythm of Africa, but ignored its cries for justice. It has admired its beauty, but dismissed its pain. The line between appreciation and appropriation is, ultimately, a line of power, and closing that power gap is the work of our generation. Just imagine, for a second, in Africa where its immense cultural and economic wealth is reinvested back into its own people. Imagine the art, the innovation, the prosperity that would unleash. That isn't a fantasy. It's a future worth fighting for.